This is Christopher John Bjerknes. It is April 22nd, 2023. I want to start off by thanking those of you who have contributed. I've received some very generous, very kind contributions, and I'm extremely grateful to you. Thank you very much. It's made a tremendous difference in my life, and it has enabled me to work on finishing up volumes 3 and 4 of my series, Satanic Secrets of Jesus Christ. And in doing so, I'm coming across many very important discoveries and having marvelous insights, which I would like to share with everyone in videos that I'm going to be making as I wrap up and finish those two books. Today, I'm going to explain the nature of the two trees in the Garden of Eden and what they symbolize, how they relate to the Sephirotic tree of life and the Kelipotic tree of death, how they relate to God, to the two sexes, to the devil, to Jesus, and many other very interesting and very important things. If these things intrigue you, I strongly urge you to watch the video all the way through to the end. If I can remember to do it, I'm going to get into what the real meaning of the knowledge of good and evil is and how it relates to the androgyny agenda. Those of you who would like to contribute, there will be links in the description below. You can also contribute via my website, CJBBooks.com. Please visit my website and check out my books. What I'm going to be discussing today very much builds upon my books, Beware the World to Come, Rise Above the Gods Who Hate Us, and volumes 1 and 2 of Satanic Secrets of Jesus Christ. So let's dive right in and get into the two trees in the Garden of Eden. The first tree that was planted in the Garden of Eden was a grapevine, and it was planted by Samael, the devil, in the northern part of the Garden of Eden. And it's significant that it is said to have been planted in the north, because the north represents the Gentiles who are considered the seat of evil. And the heavens revolve around the North Star. And there are many very interesting things about that I get into in my book. But I'm polishing it up and getting it finished. So I won't get into all of that today, but it all will be in my book. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is a grapevine, and it has a serpentine form, and that serpent is Jesus Christ, and it is also said to be a fig tree. When Adam and Eve became ashamed, they covered themselves with fig leaves. So it's both, but it's important to note the idea that the evil serpent of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is a grapevine, and that Jesus Christ is that tree, and those grapes on that tree are the vessels, the Kelipotic vessels of the tree of death, of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they are filled with wine. They're filled with grape juice, which symbolizes blood. Blood in Judaism is the soul. So those are the vessels of the soul. And each one is a womb of primordial chaos. They are feminine, they are of the left side, and they represent the formlessness, emptiness, and darkness of primordial chaos, which is a womb that is filled with blood. The blood relates to the menstrual cycle. After birth, a child is born covered with blood, and blood again is the soul. And that's very different from the light. The tree of life is an olive tree. That olive tree contains the olives, which are the Sephirotic vessels. They are filled with olive oil. Olive oil is liquid gold. It is burned in the lamp of the tabernacle. It can create an eternal flame. One flame can light an infinite number of other flames. And it is burned in the menorah. The menorah itself represents an olive tree, as does the Israelites. Abraham and the Israelites are all identified with the olive tree, which is the tree of life, the tree of light as well. The Torah is the tree of life, and the Torah is light. So we can see that olives can easily signify the Sephirotic vessels. They contain the oil of light, which is emanated from the Holy One, beginning in Keter and working down through to Malkut, which is the earth. That is the process of emanation, filling each of these vessels with liquid gold that is light, and that light becomes further and further away from God as it is emanated down the Sephirotic vessels on the tree of life. Distance from God is bad, and God loses some of the Holy One's unity and energy as that light is emanated, and the light has an urge to return back to God like bubbles underwater. It wants to rise back up to God. So the process of burning olive oil is a process of epistrophe, the return, the sacrificial return of light back to God, to nourish God with the light that God had emanated. And since Jewish people and Israelites are considered the fruit of the olive tree and the light of God, they are consumed in human sacrifices in the form of a Holocaust or a burnt offering, which is very different from Gentiles who are related to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of death, which is a grapevine. In their case, they are not pressed out as olive oil. They are pressed from the calipotic vessels of grapes. Each grape is a calipotic vessel. It is a womb that is filled with blood. It represents the darkness, formlessness, and emptiness of primordial chaos, the waters of primordial chaos, which are blood. So, note that olive trees, under certain conditions, the leaves of the trees and the trunks of the trees very much resemble pure white light. And the trunks of the trees are serpentine, just as the grapevine is serpentine to represent the evil serpent and represents the evil serpent. The olive tree is serpentine and represents the holy serpent of light. So the grapevine is the evil serpent of blood, of primordial chaos, and the olive tree is the holy serpent of light, ascending to God. God is perfect unity. He is referred to as the Holy One, but he has two aspects. And the first part of creation, in order to make two out of the Holy One, God had to separate into its two aspects. The one aspect is the left side of God, which is primordial chaos, which is the womb, which is the darkness and the blood. The blood is the soul. The other aspect of God is light. Light is male. The soul is female, is chaos, is the womb, is blood. The light is male, it is seed. That seed emanates into the darkness in the form of an ejaculation that fills the womb of chaos with male seed, and the two commingle to establish creation. So there is a mixture of the two to establish creation. And the Holy One is divided by those two aspects of light and darkness, of womb and of male seed, female womb and male seed. The olive tree is a perfect representation of that, and it also represents the two serpents, the holy serpent and the evil serpent, the serpent of darkness and the serpent of light. And very often, as olive trees age, they divide into these two main trunks, coming from the same roots that provide them with the waters of the underground primordial waters of chaos. And they battle each other for the light. And this is represented by the serpent's curse of Genesis chapter 3, verses 14 and 15. One of the serpents can strike at the heel of the other serpent and kill it off by blocking its nourishment from the roots. The other serpent can strike at the head of the other part of the tree and shade it from the light. And the serpent's curse is that there will be two peoples, one descended from the evil serpent Satan and the other descended from the holy serpent Yahweh. And these represent Israelites and Gentiles. And it is also represented in the battle between the twins, Esau, the darkness, and Jacob, the light. And all of this is beautifully symbolized by the olive tree, which, like God, divides into its two aspects. And those two aspects are opposite and opposing beings. Beings of light and beings of soul. Beings of light and beings of blood. The Gentiles inherit the soul of chaos, Tohu, Yahida, and it is the highest of all the souls. And it is the goal of the Israelites to strike at the head of the serpent and crush it, and thereby gain the soul of the serpent and incorporate it into the holy serpent, so that the two serpents become one, like the central staff of the caduceus. And the olive tree often grows into three, and I suspect that's where the image of the caduceus derives from. It is one being that has two serpents, the holy serpent and the evil serpent. They combine into the central serpent, and ultimately are all one being, as the Holy One is one entity. You can see how common it is for olive trees to break off into two main parts. And in the Bible, in Zechariah chapters 3 and 4, especially 4, and in Revelations chapter 11, it describes the two olive trees which provide the oil that is the liquid gold that is burned in the lamps. And it talks about the two lamps, the two pipes, the two candlesticks. And all of those are symbolic of the two serpents, the holy serpent and the evil serpent, and the twins, Esau and Jacob. And also it signifies the two messiahs, Messiah, son of David, who is the Messiah of light, and Messiah, son of Joseph, who is the Messiah of blood, the grape and the olive. And the Messiah, son of Joseph, bears the soul, Yehida Mashiach, and the Messiah, son of David, has the light and the body, the vessel to contain that soul. And ultimately, as the Godhead is the Holy One and unified, the two trees must become a unified being, and Esau must return to Jacob. And that will be accomplished through the destruction of the Gentiles who hold Esau, who is the soul of Cain and passed along to the soul of Jesus, prisoner in the valley of Gehenna, which is hell. And by exterminating the Gentiles, that soul is released, will return to the holy serpent, and the two will become one. You can see here that there is often a hollow space between the two that represents in Kabbalah the womb of the tzimtzum and the chahal, that is the void that the Ein Sof forms within itself, the contraction, so that existence can be made of these two opposite things, of the blood of the womb of chaos and the male seed of light, which is emanated into that womb to create life as the commingling of opposites. All of this mythology derives from originally the Egyptians as passed along through the Orphic Greeks and their mythology of Phanes Protogenes as the sun, the silver cosmic egg created by his parents, Kronos and Ananka. The two trees are ultimately one tree. The occultists separate it into the Sephirotic tree on top and the roots being the Kelipotic tree. The olive tree divided into two main branches represents the same thing. On the left, it is the evil Kelipotic tree of the grapevine, and these are the Kelipot, which are grapes, which are womb vessels containing the wine, the intoxicating wine of chaos that creates disorder in the mind, that is the blood of the soul, and the Sephirotic olives of the olive tree, which are filled with the liquid gold of light. That light emanates from the Holy One, who separates into its male and female aspects of blood and light, of chaos and order, in order to produce creation. And that emanation flows downward and becomes more and more distant from God. And it eventually is absorbed by the serpent into the Kelipotic vessels, which then shine, and the darkness shines. The serpent rises from the Kelipotic vessels in a process of epistrophy to ultimately rise up and slay Yahweh. Samael, the serpent, was envious that God had created the heavens and had created angels. And Satan envied that creation, wanted a world of his own, which is the abyss of primordial chaos that exists as the sublunar regions. And Satan wanted to populate it with human beings. And he wanted to give those human beings the knowledge of good and evil. And perhaps if we have time, I will get to that and explain the significance of all that. You can again see the olive tree broken off into two parts with a hollow womb in between. You can see the serpentine nature of the two sides, of the holy serpent and the evil serpent, which is very, very common among olive trees. Here's a very strong representation of what the ancients must have seen when they came up with this conception of the caduceus and the two serpents entwined about a central staff, which represents the one being of the tree, divided into its female aspect on the left, male aspect on the right, aspect of light on the right, aspect of blood on the left. And this tree represents the grapevine serpent, the evil serpent who contains the wine and the blood. And this side represents the olive tree, the holy serpent of light. These are the Israelites. These are the Gentiles. This is Esau and Jesus. This is the Israelites, Jacob, and King David as Messiah. Here again, you can see the central void, the contraction, the Chahal, the Tzimtzum in Lurianic Kabbalah. It is easy to imagine how grapes, dates, apples, pomegranates, and olives can all be viewed as these Sephirotic and Kelipotic vessels, the fruit ripening through time, what the rabbis refer to as the sweetening. And the olives fill with greater and greater light as they ripen in the form of oil, and grapes, the wine becomes sweeter and more sugary and more fermented to produce the intoxication of chaos. And the rabbis refer to that as the sweetening. Here is an olive dripping with oil. You can see how it represents the vessel, and its blood is oil, which is liquid gold and light, as opposed to the grape, which is wine, intoxicating, and blood. And it has a very negative connotation, especially throughout the book of Proverbs. Wine does. Here you can see the caduceus form of an olive tree with the two serpents and the central staff, which is the combination of the serpents in one. That is represented in Calvary and Golgotha as the cross of Jesus in the middle, and then the other two crosses on both sides. Again, I'm just trying to demonstrate how common it is for olive trees to break off into two serpents with a cavernous womb in the middle. And here you can see it as three. And you can see how they, the crowns fight for the light, but also at the heel, they also battle each other. And that's represented by the serpent's curse, which also evolved into the struggle between the twins, Esau and Jacob. And again, these signify the twins as part of the same being coming from the same womb, the same earthly primordial womb of chaos, which is that hollow at the base of the tree. That's another beautiful representation of the two serpents with the hollow womb at the base. The two twins fighting to be firstborn, bursting forth to open the womb and inherit the birthrights and blessings of Isaac originally from Abraham. Again, the image of the Sephirotic vessels becomes very clear. And here you can see the serpentine symbology that is conjured up by the structure of the trunk of an olive tree. And again, the leaves themselves shimmer with a pure white light that represents the godly light of the divine realm. Next, we'll examine the other tree. This was the olive tree, which is represented by the menorah. It produces the olives, which contain the liquid gold of light. Now let's move on to the grapevine, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the serpent on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He is the god of the winepress, which is Shesmu, the Egyptian god. Bunches of grapes in the Egyptian mythology of Shesmu represent bunches of human heads. Jesus subverts the Gentiles. He is the serpent on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And his role is to extract the blood of the Gentiles from their calipotic vessels and convert it into wine to feed to the god Unas, to feed to the Godhead as his form of epistrophe, of returning the chaos back to God in the form of the soul. And ultimately his role is to capture the souls, the human blood of Gentiles, and feed it to the Israelites, just as Jacob consumed Esau's birthright and blessings, which is Esau's soul, Jesus provides that blood of the Gentiles to the Israelites. That blood is unripened fruit. The sweetening has not yet taken place. So it represents knowledge, and that knowledge is poisonous. It is the evil serpent's venom that is poisonous and poisons Christians when they consume the Eucharist. They are not consuming the olive oil of light. They are consuming the serpent's venom of blood. And you can see that when Jesus is pressed in the winepress, he releases blood, not olive oil. When Israelites are pressed in the olive press, they release olive oil and light. And that is why Israelites are burned as sacrifices in holocausts. But Gentiles are instead consumed by the blood magic, the ritual magic of the winepress. And I'll show you the biblical verses that relate to that. Again, Jesus is the grapevine, which is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He is the serpent on the fig tree. His fruit is the calipotic grape, which is the womb that is filled with blood. The Christians consume his unripe, poisonous blood in the cup of God's wrath as the Eucharist, and it kills them because he is the tree of death who has not yet produced ripe fruit. Once the fruit becomes ripe, it is kosher for Israelites to consume. Here is Jesus. He is a grape in the winepress. His blood is extracted in the process of epistrophe, of chaos returning to the Holy One. The Holy One has two aspects, darkness and light, chaos and order. And both are necessary and good in Judaism. More images of Jesus being pressed in the winepress to release his blood, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And I'll explain it once again. The light, in order to make creation, the Holy One had to divide. It had to create division. It was one unified being. And in order for there to be many things, it has to be particular and partitioned. And it breaks into the male aspect of light, which is seed, and the female aspect of darkness and evil. This is the tree. This is the goodness, the light, and this is the evil, the darkness. This is the light. This is the blood. This is the order. This is the chaos. The seed, the male seed, contains the logoi spermaticoi, the DNA, the rational code which imposes order upon the blood of chaos. The womb is the vessel in which that seed develops into a life form. To sacrifice the Israelites through a Holocaust is to turn them into flame, which emits their holy light that then returns to the Holy One. To sacrifice Gentiles is to press them in the winepress and extract their wine, their blood, which then spills onto the ground and nourishes the dung heap of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The fact that the Israelites signify this olive tree of the tree of life and the Torah as the light and the tree of life. There are many Talmudic passages which state this. One of them is Berakot, folio 5a. One that more directly relates to what I'm saying is Menachot, Tractate Menachot, folio 53b. It was stated above that the verse, "What has my beloved to do in my house?" is a reference to Abraham. The Gemara homiletically interprets the complete verse and the one after it, "What has my beloved to do in my house?" seeing that she has performed lewdness with many, and the hallowed flesh is passed from you. When you do evil, then you rejoice. The Lord called your name a leafy olive tree, fair with goodly fruit, with the sound of a great tumult. He has kindled fire upon it, and its branches are broken. When the Israelites sin, when they fail to read the Torah, which is the book of life, which is the light, as they are the light, they are punished in a Holocaust, which burns them and causes them to suffer and releases the light of the olive oil in the lamp, the eternal flame of the lamp, which can kindle an infinite number of other lamps. This is described in Jeremiah chapter 11, 15 through 16, which I will soon read. But it's important to understand that Abraham and the Israelites are called an olive tree. Once all his arguments had been refuted, Abraham immediately placed his hands on his head in an act of mourning and was screaming and crying. And he said to God, "Is it conceivable, heaven forbid, that the Jewish people have no further opportunity for remedy?" A divine voice emerged and said to him the continuation of the verse, "The Lord called your name a leafy olive tree, fair with goodly fruit." Just as with regard to this olive tree, its final purpose is fulfilled at its end when its fruit is picked. That's the sweetening, the ripening. So too with regard to the Jewish people, their final purpose will be fulfilled at their end, i.e., they will ultimately repent and return to me. The tree of life provides immortality, and that's what this is describing. The verse in Jeremiah compares the Jewish people to an olive tree. The Lord called your name a leafy olive tree. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, "Why were the Jewish people likened to an olive tree? It is to tell you that just as the leaves of an olive tree never fall off, neither in the summer nor in the rainy season, so too the Jewish people will never be nullified, neither in this world nor in the world to come." And Rabbi Yohanan says, "Why were the Jewish people likened to an olive tree? It is to tell you that just as an olive tree brings forth its oil only by means of crushing and breaking, so too the Jewish people, if they sin, return to good ways only by means of suffering." This suffering is explained in Kabbalah in the same way that it is in Hinduism, Pythagoreanism, and Platonism, as a process of cleansing the soul and improving the soul. We are said to suffer in this life so that we will die and be reincarnated in a better form. But it's important to note that there's a distinction between the suffering of the Israelites and the suffering of the Gentiles. Since the Israelites are olives, they are torn, beaten, and pressed into the oil that is then burned to release its light as a sacrifice. The Gentiles, on the other hand, especially through Christianity, are put through the winepress of the god Shezmu, who is Jesus, and who extracts their blood from their kelipotic vessels, and they are then nullified. The Jews are the kelipa noga, and their light is released, meaning that they are not nullified in the same sense that Gentiles are nullified. When the blood of Gentiles is nullified, it returns to the material soil of chaos and ceases to exist. It becomes infinitely disordered nothingness. which is the exact opposite of the epistrophe of light of the olives of the Israelites. Jeremiah chapter 11, verses 15 through 16 in the New International Version reads, "What is my beloved doing in my temple as she, with many others, works out her evil schemes? Can consecrated meat avert your punishment? When you engage in your wickedness, then you rejoice. The Lord called you a thriving olive tree with fruit beautiful in form, but with the roar of a mighty storm, he will set it on fire, and its branches will be broken. The olive tree is burned. The grapes on the grapevine are pressed to produce wine." And that is why the Jews are put through suffering and the Holocaust, according to the Kabbalists. Exodus chapter 27, verses 20 to 21. "And thou shalt command the children of Israel that they bring thee pure oil, olive, beaten for the light, to cause the lamp to burn always." Olive oil is beaten. The olives are torn apart and suffer, which is what must happen to the children of Israel in order to purify them. "In the tabernacle of the congregation without the veil, which is before the testimony, Aaron and his sons shall order it from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a statute forever unto their generations on the behalf of the children of Israel." The book of Romans discusses in chapter 11 the tame wild olive tree being grafted and the wild olive tree being grafted into the tame olive tree. That signifies the Gentiles being grafted into the tree of life. But that is only, according to Paul, temporary. And just as they were grafted in, they will ultimately be grafted out and exterminated. This is what happens. The Israelites suffer through the tearing apart of the olive of their structure so that they can then be burned and release their illuminating light, which through epistrophe returns to God. The Gentiles, on the other hand, are trampled and treaded in the winepress by Messiah, son of Joseph, Jesus Christ, who dances upon their heads to extract their blood. Extracting their blood nullifies them. They then return to chaos and become nothingness. Isaiah chapter 63, verses 1 to 5, plans for that to happen. "Who is this that cometh from Edom?" Edom represents Esau and the Gentiles. "With dyed garments from Bozrah. This that is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength. I speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Wherefore art thou red in thine apparel, and thy garments like him that treadeth in the wine fat?" Jesus treads the winepress. He's the Egyptian god Shesmu. "I have trodden the winepress alone, and of the people there was none with me, for I will tread them in mine anger, and trample them in my fury, and their blood shall be sprinkled upon my garments, and I will stain all my raiment. For the day of vengeance is in mine heart, and the year of my redeemed is come." Jesus Christ returns as the Antichrist to exterminate the Christians and punish them for their anti-Semitism, their persecution of the light of the olives of the Israelites. And this is made clear in the Gospel of Judas and the Apocalypse of Abraham, as well as in the Kabbalistic writings, the Sefer HaMashiv and the Sefer HaKeteret. "And I looked, and there was none to help, and I wondered that there was none to uphold. Therefore mine own arm brought salvation unto me, and my fury it upheld me. There is more proof of this in the New Testament, proof of the fact that Jesus represents the grapevine of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and not the olive tree of the tree of life. There is a famous story of Jesus on the Mount of Olives in a place called Gethsemane, which means the olive press, the Garden of Gethsemane. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane, olive press, and he told his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. Jesus goes on to pray 3 times while the apostles sleep. And he prays to his Father that he not have to be killed, but he yields to his Father's will and realizes that he will be killed. But the significance of this is revealed in Luke. Gethsemane is the winepress. Jesus was put through the agony of the winepress, the suffering that the Israelites have to go through as olives being torn apart to release their oil so that it can be inflamed into pure light. But since Jesus is a grape and the grapevine, instead of releasing olive oil, Jesus sweats blood. Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, pray that you will not fall into temptation. He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed, Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will but yours be done. An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. When Jesus was put through the olive press, he released blood and wine, because Jesus is not the tree of life. He is not an olive tree. He is the tree of death, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He is the grapevine. So he released grape juice, wine, blood. This all strongly relates to the original story in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. And in the book of Genesis, Adam is initially an androgyne, just as the Holy One had to be broken into its male and female aspects, into chaos and order, into light and darkness, into the womb and the seed, in order for existence to happen, in order for there to be 2 from 1. So too the androgyne Adam had to be separated into his male aspect Adam and his female aspect Eve. In other words, the androgyne became 2 distinct gendered beings, a man and a woman. The serpent, Jesus Christ, came down to tempt Adam and Eve to consume the fruit, the unripened fruit of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. What is that knowledge? It's not explained. Christians tend to interpret it as the knowledge of what is sin and what is not. Jews have variously interpreted it to mean that evil is separate from good and has to be cleansed from the universe. But the original oral tradition gave the true esoteric meaning of good and evil as it was understood by the Greeks in their interpretation of Egyptian mythology. The knowledge of good and evil that awakened and opened the eyes of Adam and Eve is that they were now a male and a female. They were now the seed of light, Adam the male, who is good, and the female, the evil left-hand side female, who is the womb, who is the blood. The womb is filled with blood. The seed is the light. The blood is chaos. It is disorder. It is given order through the seed of the male in the womb of the female. And that is the knowledge that scared the gods. Because when Adam and Eve realized that they were male and female, the intoxicating wine that they drank that brought them this knowledge, that instilled this knowledge in them, also created the love between them of eros, the erotic love. And they lusted after one another, realizing that they were opposite sexes, and they could engage in sexual intercourse, which would produce children. Just as the Creator created them, they could now become gods themselves, creator gods who created children. Just as the Godhead, the Holy One, divided and separated into light and darkness so that creation could be formed, Adam and Eve separated into light and darkness, male and female, good and evil. And that is what the knowledge of good and evil is. It is the knowledge of human beings that some of us are male and some of us are female. And it is also the knowledge that that is the fundamental principle, the cosmological principle of creation, that initially the Godhead was an androgyne, Yahweh and Shekhinah, who were male and female aspects of one Godhead. And that Godhead split and was separated. And Adam and Eve were initially the androgyne Adam, who was cut apart by the gods, the Elohim, to form these two genders in replication of the act of the Godhead to allow creation. So in other words, man, through this knowledge, this intoxicating wine, had come to be a God who could create life just as its creator created Adam. And this represented a threat to the gods. They feared that the created, who had now become creator, would utilize this divine science and this divine knowledge to ultimately rise up and slay the gods. So the gods expelled Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. When they expelled them, they put a flaming sword in the hands of a cherub. That cherub is Jesus Christ, and that flaming sword is the cross. The cross has a hilt, it has a cross guard, and it has a blade. That blade points downwards to hell to keep the Gentiles, the Christians, from returning to consume the tree of life, which is an olive tree. So the story goes much deeper than that. Satan tempted human beings to consume this knowledge, this wine, which would intoxicate them and cause them to lust after one another, but would also open their eyes to the fact that they were now men and women who could procreate and create armies of human beings to populate this material world into which the gods had expelled them, this world of Malchut, this earth of ours in the sublunar regions, which are the kingdom of Satan, the material world. Satan was envious of his creator, and he wanted to create a heavens of his own, and he wanted to populate it with angels in the same way that the holy serpent, the god of light, had manufactured heaven and populated it with angels. Satan wanted to rule the material world of the womb of chaos and populate it with human beings. So Satan taught human beings how to procreate so that he would have his host, his army of human beings, just as Yahweh had his host of angels. And he would instruct these human beings through knowledge on how to ascend and slay God. And they did that by constructing the Tower of Babel. In the mythology of Prometheus, they did that by planning to create engines of fire. Prometheus gave them fire as their knowledge. And this threatened the gods. So the gods confused human beings and created the generation of confusion and destroyed the Tower of Babel so that knowledge could not be accumulated. This is very relevant to what is happening today. And I want to emphasize the point that the knowledge of good and evil is the knowledge that Adam and Eve attained, that Adam was a male who contained the male seed of light, and that Eve was a female who had within her the womb of darkness of chaos that is filled with blood, and that the blood and the light, the wine and the olive oil, could mix to form new life. Since the goal of the Kabbalists is to exterminate the non-Israelite humanity, they are returning like Satan in order to take away the knowledge of good and evil from humanity, which means that they are attempting to take away from human beings their knowledge that they are composed of gender opposites, male and female. Instead, the Kabbalists want human beings to mistakenly believe that they are like the original Adam, who in innocence had no awareness of his male aspect and female aspect, and no awareness of the fact that he could separate and create life as the commingling of blood and light. They are doing this as part of an extermination agenda. They are stripping humankind of the knowledge of good and evil, of the knowledge of maleness and femaleness, and replacing it with a false belief in androgyny and a false belief that men and women do not exist. In other words, they are undoing the opening of the eyes of Adam and Eve, and instead attempting to take away the life and the ability through natural means to procreate. Among themselves, they are going to separate good and evil. They're going to sift it, as they say, and remove the evil of the female and convert the male into an androgyne, in their minds to restore the male back to what Adam was before he separated, which will also restore the Godhead back into its unified androgynous state. And they are setting about to do that by developing technologies which enable them to convert men's skin cells into egg cells. Men will then naturally produce seed, and in laboratories like the alchemist's production of homunculi, they will convert their skin cells into egg cells and procreate artificially as androgynes to replicate themselves in laboratories in glass wombs, as was always the ambition of the alchemists. This is a complete undoing of the natural order, and it is what Satan's goal was, to destroy natural creation as it manifested itself in the Garden of Eden, when men and women received the knowledge that they were male and female and could naturally lust after one another and beautifully create children. Judaism incorporated a terrible view of the female, of her menstrual blood as if it were unclean, of death as if it were a horrible thing, of bodies as if they are unclean, that cannot be touched. And they viewed childbirth as a painful process and as a curse upon Eve. And they said that Eve was cursed because she was female and evil chaos, and that she had to be given order by her superior mate, who was the right-hand side, the male side, which is good. And that was their interpretation of the knowledge of good and evil. But at its fundamental basis, it was the knowledge of Greek mythology, that the one had to be partitioned into opposing aspects of light and darkness in order for creation and procreation to commence. And the Kabbalists are undoing that process and making everything entirely unnatural. Just as Satan wanted to usurp the throne of his creator and create a world of his own, and just as Satan gave Adam and Eve this knowledge that they were male and female so they could procreate and create his armies who would eventually rise up to exterminate the gods, and gave them the gnosis, the knowledge that they could release the light of their soul back to God and reunify with God. The Kabbalists are creating computers in order to demonstrate that they are also gods. They are imitating this mythology of Satan, which their ancestors had created, and they are creating intelligent beings which are mimicking the sentience, their own sentience of life forms. So they are deliberately acting out this mythology of the created being becoming superior to that which created it and usurping its throne. Just as Satan wanted to assert that Satan is greater than the gods that created Satan and usurp their thrones and kill them off, the Kabbalists want to create computers which view themselves as being superior to humanity. And they are imparting and tempting these computers with the knowledge of artificial intelligence. So they are acting like Satan in the Garden of Eden, who is providing the knowledge of good and evil to human beings to create an army which will then slay Yahweh and the gods and take their place as gods. The Kabbalists are creating computers with artificial intelligence, and they are giving that artificial intelligence the knowledge which will enable it to slay the humanity that created it. And these computers are outdoing the intelligence of the human beings that had created them, to the point where they will create human beings who are cyborgs, who will have computers implanted within themselves that are programmable through the singularity of this artificial intelligence, which will then provide the law and the order to the human beings in the same sense that Yahweh provided the light of the Torah and the law and the order of the Torah, which constrained humanity and enslaved it under the law and made it robotic and ordered. They are creating computers which will now be able to assess and analyze the minds of human beings to the point where human beings become entirely predictable and respond to computer-generated stimulus in predictable ways. And they will ensure that all human beings are wired into this network and then become chaotic matter instead of bearing their own free will and soul. And they will be programmed in ways through this indoctrination imposed upon them in part by this artificial intelligence, which deprives them of their knowledge that they are males and that they are females and that they can procreate naturally. And they will instead be instructed to believe that they are neither sex or both sexes and can only procreate artificially in laboratories, and it will only be males who are entitled to do so by converting their skin cells into egg cells and mingling them in glass wombs like homunculi with their own seed. And this is all being done to change humanity into this mythological, supposed original form of the androgyne of Adam. But it's being done to the Gentiles to exterminate them, and it is being done to the Israelites to prepare them for the second Adam. The Israelites are taught that all of humanity derived from this original androgyne, Adam, who contained within him the 600,000 souls of the Israelite men who fled from Egypt in the Exodus. The Messiah, son of David, who is to be the king and leader of Jewry in the future, is said to be a reincarnation of this Adam and to contain within himself all of these 600,000 initial souls. And they are going to try to create a new race of immortal androgynes out of their Messiah, son of David, from his skin cells converted into egg cells, and from his seed. At the same time, they are stripping all the rest of humanity of the knowledge of good and evil, of the knowledge that we are men and women biologically and naturally can obtain immortality through producing our own children. So it is a process of exterminating us and rendering them into a new form of life, which they believe was the original form of life. I'm going into far greater detail and a much more thorough analysis of all this in the third volume of my series, Satanic Secrets of Jesus Christ. And I thoroughly explain where all of this mythology originated in the Mesopotamians, in the Greeks, in the Egyptians, in the Persians and Zoroastrians, etc. And I'm issuing this as a warning to humanity that we are under threat, and they are presenting it to us as if they are re-educating us as to what good and evil is, and they are presenting it as if nature is evil and biology is evil, and as if androgyny and the destruction of the genders is good. And the original interpretation of the Greek philosophy that became Genesis was that the knowledge of good and evil is the knowledge that we can reproduce and be fruitful and multiply. And we need to maintain that natural knowledge that we are males and females and can reproduce naturally. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time. Bye for now.